Hi everyone, on today's episode I'll be using a skull mould. Before we start today's episode, I want to show you guys everything I'll be using, and then throughout the episode I'll explain how I'm using it. Now to start off with, you guys already know I've got a skull mould, I've got some colour shifting powder, some black pigment, some glycerin, an LED light, a glass bauble, some crushed opal, a little plastic disc, a power cable, my epoxy resin, and let's not forget my gloves. Now if all this comes together and works perfectly, I've also got some Australian melee burl. Now I'm sure some of you might be wondering how I'm going to use all this in a skull mould, but don't worry, I'm about to show you. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my glass bauble and fill it with some of this opal. This is man-made synthetic opal. I've got some peacock blue and royal lavender. Now once I've done that, I'll fill the bauble up with some glycerin and then I'll seal it with this plastic cap. Now there is one thing I do need to do to the cap before gluing it on, and that is drill a hole so I can mount the LED. It's now time to glue in the LED to the disc, and for that I'll be using some 5-minute epoxy. While I'm waiting for that glue to dry, I can start putting the opal inside the bauble. Now I'm going to add in my glycerin. I'm just going to add a little bit at first. I'm going to swirl it around, make sure all the opal is covered, and then I'll put in some more. Now the reason I'm doing this is to try and get all the air that's trapped around the opal, because if I don't, once I fill it with glycerin and the air comes out, I'm going to end up with a big air bubble. Now chances are you're going to have a little one anyway, but you don't want to have it any bigger. Now this next step can be a little tricky, because what I need to do is take my disc here with the LED in it and put some 5-minute epoxy just around the edge. I then need to put it on top of my bauble, making sure that no epoxy dribbles inside. So it's now time for me to start working on the mould. Now I'm sure some of you have figured out what I'm doing, but for those who haven't, I plan on taking my bauble and suspending it in the top of the skull. Now in order to see that bauble, the first resin pour that I do will have to be clear. And then because I'm going to add some colour shift powder to this mould, the second pour will need to be black. Now the reason I'm explaining this to you now is that I'm in two minds as to how to do it. Originally I was going to pour my clear layer first, then apply the colour shift, but I'm a bit worried that as I'm applying the colour shift, I might break the mould away from the clear, and then when the black resin goes in, it might fall past it. And the other thing I was concerned about was I really didn't want to see a straight line here where the clear meets the black. Now I do have another idea, but I'm not too sure if it's going to work. I plan on taking my colour shift powder, coating the inside of the mould here, and getting very close to where the bauble will sit. I'm then going to take some UV resin, colour it black, and hopefully create a drip effect around the bauble. Now I'm not too sure if all this is going to work, but I'm definitely willing to give it a go. I wonder if it'd be easier to flip this mould inside out. How creepy does that look? Almost looks like a jellyfish. So it looks like I'll be able to tell where the bauble will sit, so I know where to go. Well, it's now time for me to turn this the right way, and I really hope I've left enough. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So now that I've finished putting on the colour shift, it's time to apply the UV resin. Now, if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't feel too confident, but I kind of don't have a choice. Now, this is going to be really hard for me to show on camera, but I'll do my best. So I've had it sitting under the torch for about half an hour now, and I think it looks pretty good. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't show you more on camera because my big sausage fingers just get in the way. But as you can see there, I think it looks okay. So my next step is to attach some wires to the LED, and then once that's done, I'll be able to take the bauble and suspend it inside the skull. Well, that's not my prettiest soldering job, but it'll work. I'm going to keep this fairly simple, and I'm just going to hot glue a paddle pop stick to this wire. One last thing before I drop it in, wiping off my fingerprints. I'll take these off the tripod so you can have a look. It's now time to pour our first resin layer. Well, we didn't need a lot of resin, but don't worry about my leftovers. I've got plenty of projects on the go. So now I'm just going to leave this overnight and we'll check on it tomorrow. So it's now the next day and I've switched to the overhead camera. That way you guys can see a little better. Now if we take a look down inside the skull, you can see where I poured the clear resin around the bauble. And now that that's cured, I can mix up my black resin and pour it over the top. All we have to do now is leave this to cure. After I flame my bubbles off, of course. Well, it's now the next day, our resin's nice and hard, and it's time to take this out. And I've got to admit, I'm really nervous about this one. I just have no idea if it worked. Looks like a candle. Oh no. My UV didn't work. I'm going to go take this straight out in the sun. Luckily the sun comes straight in. I'm just going to leave it there for a few minutes. Well, I've had this in the sun for half an hour, and unfortunately it didn't work. The colour shift and the UV resin stayed on the mould, and the part that stayed on the skull is still tacky. I'm so disappointed. On the bright side though, the bauble looks good. Well, I guess I need to expect these things when I'm experimenting. So the next thing I'm going to do is try and clean this up as best I can and see if we can salvage this project. I'm going to try a little bit of acetone and see if I can get this UV off. Kind of feel like I'm making more of a mess. I think next I'm going to try and scrape it off. You know, it's funny how it worked right up against the bauble, but didn't work further down. Well, I've scraped it all off, and I think I'm going to be able to save this, but I'm going to need the help of another tool. My Dremel. I'm going to take the Dremel and I'm going to mark up the back of the skull and the front of the skull to try and match the top here. And then once that's done, I'm going to try and reapply the colour shift. So I think our new story is, this guy used to be a boxer and he had a long fighting career. Now that I've got the skull all cleaned up, the next step is to put on some tacket. Now that that's dry, I can reapply my colour shift. Now that all my colour shift is back on, I'm going to seal it by spraying a coat of clear. While I was waiting for the skull to dry, I went ahead and shaped my piece of mallee burl and gave it a coat of clear. And now that my burl and my skull is dry, I can go ahead and wire it up. Well, this project definitely didn't go to plan, but I think I was able to save it. But I want you guys to be the judge. Let me know, did I save it or not? And as for the mould, I was able to save this. All the UV resin came out and it's as good as new. Now let's check out this skull.